Please stop. Cool down.
It happened in less than a heartbeat. A quiet courtyard, the soft thud of hooves, and then a moment so tense the air itself seemed to tighten. Camilla, confident and smiling, stepped toward the Queen's beloved Stallion, a horse so deeply tied to royal history that even stable doors felt sacred. But just as she reached for the reins, a royal guard moved in front of her, blocking her path. Why? What rule was so important that he'd risk stopping the Queen Consort herself? A silent standoff began, and it changed everything. If royal moments like this fascinate you as much as they do us, you're in the right place. Hit like, tap subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves the royals behind-the-scenes stories. It really helps the channel, and you'll never miss the next unbelievable moment inside the palace gates. The morning had started quietly, one of those soft, pale British mornings where the light seems to drift rather than fall. Windsor's private courtyard was calm, almost drowsy, the air filled with the faint scent of dew, leather, and polished wood from the stables. A few grooms moved calmly across the yard, brushing down horses, adjusting tack, and offering nods to staff passing by. Nothing about this day suggested it would become one of the most whispered about moments within the royal household. Camilla stepped into the courtyard with a purpose that felt both casual and confident. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't performing. She carried herself as someone who had lived enough years in the public eye to know how to move quietly when she wanted to. She was dressed simply, country practicality with a touch of royal polish, and she smiled at the familiar stable staff. Horses had always eased her. You could sense the shift in her shoulders the moment she smelled hay and heard hooves. But today wasn't about just any horse. At the far end of the courtyard, a stallion stood tethered lightly, his coat a deep, shining black that caught every glint of morning light. He wasn't beautiful in the delicate, fragile way of some royal horses. He was striking, powerful, almost regal in his own right. This was the late Queen Elizabeth II's beloved Stallion, a horse that had carried her through private rides, quiet moments, and the transitions of seasons that only a monarch truly measures. Even now, after her passing, the Stallion remained in almost living memory of her. Anyone who saw him felt it, the connection, the ache, the reminder. He was more than a horse. He was a symbol of companionship, history, and devotion. Camilla's eyes softened when she saw him. It was no secret she admired the Queen's equestrian legacy. Maybe that was why she walked straight toward him. A moment of respect, maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper, a gesture toward continuity. The grooms paused. One stable hand whispered something under his breath. Another straightened his back just a little. People didn't normally get close to the Stallion without clearance. He wasn't aggressive, but he was particular, bonded to the late Queen in ways that made him sensitive to strangers. Still, Camilla kept walking, calmly, warmly, like someone approaching a long-admired legend. And then the moment that froze everyone happened. Just as she reached the last few steps for the horse, a figure in the deep, iconic scarlet uniform of the Royal Guard stepped suddenly and firmly in front of her. His boots hit the ground with a sharp precision, the kind you feel rather than hear. His stance was solid, respectful yet immovable. His hand hovered subtly near the hilt of his ceremonial sword, not threatening, but signaling authority. Camilla blinked in surprise. So did everyone else. No one, absolutely no one, expected a royal guard to physically block the Queen Consort's path. Not in a courtyard, not around staff, and certainly not over a horse. The guard bowed his head slightly, but he didn't move. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice steady. "Permission to approach the Stallion has not been granted." The words floated in the air, strangely heavy. Camilla looked at him, not offended, but visibly confused. Royals were used to protocol, but even for her, this felt unusually strict. A stable hand swallowed hard. Another pretended to focus on a bucket that suddenly became incredibly interesting. A groom muttered something that sounded like a small prayer. No one wanted to be caught in the middle of what looked like a budding confrontation.
Camilla's gaze drifted past the guard, back to the stallion. The horse flicked an ear, watching her with that sharp intelligence that had always set him apart. It was almost as if he recognized the moment too, the tension tightening the space, the stillness thickening between duty and royalty. She stepped slightly forward, just enough to signal she intended to move. The guard reacted instantly, not dramatically, not aggressively, just enough to make the boundary unmistakable. That's when the silence became powerful, so powerful that you could hear the soft scrape of hay being shifted in the stalls behind them. Camilla wasn't angry, but she was undeniably taken aback. It wasn't often that she was told no, especially not in this setting, and definitely not so publicly. But there was something else flickering on her face, a mix of curiosity and a touch of respect. She knew what it meant when a guard held his ground like this. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't about hierarchy. It was about duty. And this particular moment was drenched in it. She finally spoke, keeping her voice light. "Is he unsettled today?" The guard responded with the same steady calm. "Ma'am, this horse has not been cleared for unfamiliar contact. His reaction to new handling is unpredictable, and His Majesty requested strict adherence to protocol until further notice." There it was, protocol, spoken like scripture, and around the stallion, the Queen's favorite companion, protocol was practically sacred. Camilla exhaled slowly, not in frustration, but in comprehension. She wasn't being blocked because of who she was. She was being blocked because of who the horse belonged to, or rather, who he symbolized. The stable staff finally relaxed just a fraction. The grooms exchanged relieved glances. The air seemed to loosen, though the tension still hovered like an echo. Camilla stepped back gracefully, offering a small nod to the guard. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a silent statement that she understood the weight of what he was protecting. But even then, the moment didn't lose its significance, because there was a question that now hung in the air. What history, what rules, what emotional legacy made this horse so untouchable that even the Queen Consort herself had to stop? The answer wouldn't unfold in public. Not yet, but inside the palace, the meaning of that moment would ripple through conversations, memories, and private stories, all tied to the Queen, her lifelong love of horses, and the traditions that outlived her. This was no simple misunderstanding. It was a doorway to a much deeper story. To understand why the Royal Guard moved with such unwavering resolve, you have to step backward into a story that began long before that quiet moment in the courtyard. Because the stallion wasn't just another royal horse. He wasn't a symbol created by public expectation. He was a living piece of Queen Elizabeth II's private world, a world that most people never truly saw. From the day she was a child, the Queen's connection to horses was almost mythical. She didn't simply ride horses. She understood them with an intuition that amazed even career trainers. Her grooms would say she could look at a horse once and tell you if it had slept badly, eaten too much, or favored one hoof slightly when trotting. Horses were her freedom, her peace, her language. So when the stallion arrived in her life, years before her passing, he became something irreplaceable. He was strong but gentle, spirited but steady, the kind of horse that bonded deeply and rarely. And he bonded with her. They said he responded differently to her voice, that his ears would flick the moment he heard her footsteps, that he relaxed around her in ways he didn't with anyone else. For a monarch who lived under constant scrutiny, he was a sanctuary, the one being who didn't care about crowns or titles or ceremonies. He cared about her. After the Queen's passing, the question of what would happen to her beloved horses was not just a logistical matter. It was emotional, personal, sensitive. The stallion, in particular, became a matter of almost sacred care. That's where the strict protocols came from. Not rules created out of cold regulation, but out of emotional stewardship. The royal household decided that the stallion would be handled by only the most experienced grooms. Only certain riders, and only after evaluation. No unfamiliar scents. No sudden changes. Stability was everything for him. Because grief isn't something only humans feel. Horses form attachments so deep they can sense absence in ways people underestimate. Some grooms believed he waited for her at first, listening for a voice that wouldn't return. That's why the rules were created, and that's why the guard's reaction was so instantaneous. The stallion's world needed structure to keep him steady. Beyond emotional weight, there were the formal traditions. Royal horses carry legacies. They are living history. The Queen stallions, especially those she rode personally, were treated with a blend of reverence and precision that outsiders rarely understood. Every step of their routine, from grooming to exercise, followed patterns that dated back decades, even centuries. And then there was the matter of equestrian hierarchy. In the royal household, animals aren't simply cared for. They're documented, evaluated, managed with precision that mirrors the military. Each horse is a file thicker than some diplomatic briefs. Temperament notes, health logs, behavioral patterns, feed schedules, vet updates, preferred grooms, stress triggers, and riding restrictions. This stallion's file was among the most detailed. There was even a specific note stating, avoid introducing new handlers without prior assessment. Err on the side of caution due to strong legacy bond. That one line guided the guard's entire decision. Because the guard wasn't acting alone. He was enforcing combined instructions of the king's equerry, the senior groom, and the palace's equestrian advisor, all of whom had agreed that the queen's most emotionally significant horse required special boundaries. And here's the part most people don't realize. The guard knew the queen's history with the stallion personally. He had been on duty during several of her private rides. He'd watched her pat the horse's neck after a long trot, smile softly at him, even whispered to him before stepping away. He'd seen the bond himself. So when Camilla walked forward, gentle and well-intentioned, he wasn't stopping her. He was protecting the memory she was stepping toward. It wasn't about status. It wasn't about rank. It was about honoring the emotional truth every equestrian understands. Some horses love so deeply that change becomes overwhelming. The stallion didn't recognize her, didn't know her scent, didn't have trust built over years. And even though Camilla was now Queen Consort, titles don't translate across species. Horses know presence, not protocol. Imagine the stallion's perspective for a moment. A new person approaching with confidence, unfamiliar energy, unfamiliar scent, unfamiliar intention. For a horse bonded to one person, especially one who is now gone, that can feel confusing or even stressful. And stress in a large, powerful animal is dangerous for everyone around. That's why the rules existed, and why the guard obeyed them with unwavering discipline. The horse himself also held stories layered with royal meaning. He had been a gift, not from a diplomat or foreign monarch, but from one of the queen's closest private breeders. He had been trained specifically for her style of riding. He had carried her across fields on mornings when the world waited for her decisions. He had been with her in seasons of personal challenge, in times of quiet joy, and during the loneliest months of lockdown when horses became her solace. Inside the palace walls, people spoke of him as if he were part of the queen's family, not just her stables. So when she passed, the stallion became a reminder, a breathing, walking memory of her gentleness, strength, and unbreakable discipline. And memories, especially ones tied to a monarch who reigned longer than any other, are guarded fiercely. In the weeks following her death, there had been discussions, delicate ones, about whether Camilla would eventually ride him or even bond with him in her own way. But those conversations never settled into decisions. Some believed the stallion should always remain the queen's. Others believed a new bond might honor her legacy. But none of those decisions were final. Nothing had been approved, which meant one simple truth. No one, not even a queen consort, could approach without clearance. That was the heart of the guard's split-second judgment. A judgment shaped by tradition, emotion, experience, and loyalty. And here's the part most people never hear. Later that day, after Camilla left Courtyard, the senior groom walked to the stallion's stable and placed a hand gently on his neck. The horse leaned into the touch, breathing slowly, calmly, unaware of the moment he had just inspired. He didn't know about policy. He didn't know about hierarchy. He didn't know he had caused a stir among some of the most powerful people in Britain. He only knew one thing. The one who loved him most was gone. And so the royal household protected him with the same loyalty he had once given her. That is why the stallion was untouchable. That is why the guard stood firm. And that is why the moment carried far more weight than anyone watching could have guessed. Captain Alden Pierce had stood guard through thunderstorms, state visits, royal tours, and long winter evenings when the wind cut across the courtyard like a blade. He had trained under the Queen's household cavalry, where precision wasn't skill, it was a belief. The kind of belief drilled into you until instinct replaced thought. And instinct was exactly what surged through him the moment Camilla stepped toward the stallion. He hadn't planned to intervene. He hadn't rehearsed the moment. A royal guard didn't prepare to block a Queen Consort. That wasn't a scenario any training manual dared to imagine. But the rules surrounding the Queen Stallion weren't ordinary rules. They were unspoken vows woven into the traditions passed down by those who had spent lifetimes in the service of the monarchy. In that split second, Pierce didn't see a royal walking toward a horse. He saw responsibility approaching the one creature the Queen had trusted with her quietest hours. And responsibility always acted first. Before he moved, 1,000 memories crashed through him, not consciously, but as shadows of training attachments and the heavy weight of serving a monarch for whom duty had been a lifelong oath. He remembered the Queen riding out on cold mornings, her breath fogging the air, her gloved hands steady on the reins. He remembered the way she would speak softly to the stallion before mounting him, as if telling him a secret meant only for them. He remembered how she would smile, a rare, private smile, whenever the stallion's ears perked at her voice. He remembered the day she passed. And he remembered the stallion's reaction, something he never expected a horse to express, confusion, then agitation, then a kind of restless searching. The stable staff had whispered that he kept turning his head toward the royal path, as if waiting, as if he believed she might still appear. That memory alone could have stopped anyone in their tracks. So when Camilla stepped across the courtyard that morning, gentle in her approach and unaware of the emotional landmine scattered across the stallion's world, Pierce reacted the only way a man with his training could, swiftly, decisively, without hesitation. He stepped forward, solid, grounded, shielding, not because Camilla posed a threat, but because grief sometimes does. And grief in a horse the size of a small car could shatter bones with a single instinctive movement. The stallion saw everything, the shift in posture, the slight tension in the humans around him, the unfamiliar scent drifting closer. Horses don't speak English, but they understand energy with startling accuracy. The stallion's muscles tense subtly, barely visible to most eyes. But Pierce had spent enough hours around him to notice. That tiny change was enough to trigger protocol. He planted himself before Camilla, cutting the distance like a wall of discipline wrapped in red cloth. He bowed. He spoke clearly. He held the line. Camilla's expression told him she was surprised. Of course she was. Guards did not usually block the path of senior royals, unless danger was visible. But Pierce also saw something else in her eyes. She was assessing the moment, not challenging it. She was reading the room, the horse, the tension. And she saw it too, the stallion's alertness, the thin thread of unpredictability in his stance. Pierce kept his voice calm. Permission to approach has not been granted. It was the safest phrasing he could choose. It preserved respect. It left no accusation. It honored both her position and his duty. But underneath the formality lived a deeper truth. He wasn't just following orders. He was protecting the last living piece of a monarch he had sworn to serve. The courtyard fell quiet. Too quiet for the number of people standing there. Even the grooms froze, unsure whether to breathe or stay still. Only the stallion moved, shifting his weight, lowering his head an inch, then raising it again. Camilla took one step closer, not enough to break a boundary, but enough to test it gently. Pierce reacted instantly. His foot angled, his balance shifted, his presence broadened. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't arrogant. It was instinct, the instinct of a man trained to guard royal life, royal legacy, and royal memory with the same intensity. In that perfect stillness, Pierce saw the Queen again, of her unwavering sense of responsibility, of her ability to see beyond titles and into intention, of how she rewarded those who prioritized duty over comfort. He wondered, fleetingly, whether she would approve of his decision now. He believed she would. Camilla's gaze softened. She wasn't angry, just aware that she had stepped into a space shaped not by hierarchy, but by emotion. She paused, looked past him to the stallion, then back at Pierce. Is he unsettled today? It was a gentle question, but the meaning beneath it was sharper. Is this about him, or about rules? Pierce answered with the honesty expected of a soldier. He has not been clear for unfamiliar contact. There it was, the rule spoken plainly, not to protect authority, not to create distance, but to maintain stability for an animal already burdened by change. When Camilla finally nodded and stepped back, relief washed through the courtyard like a quiet breeze. The stable staff exhaled. A groom wiped sweat from his brow discreetly. A footman murmured something that sounded close to gratitude. But Pierce didn't relax yet. Not fully. His duty wasn't finished. Not until she had turned away. Not until the stallion lowered his head again. Not until the moment passed without incident. Only when Camilla offered him a faint, appreciative smile, subtle but unmistakably genuine, did Pierce allow his stance to ease. But the moment wasn't done with him, because as he watched her walk away, he felt something shift inside him, a realization, a weight. He had just made a decision that could have gone wrong in 100 different ways. He had acted on instinct that could be mistaken as defiance. He had placed duty above decorum in front of someone who could have demanded answers. And yet she had understood. That understanding was rare in royal life. It was a quiet acknowledgement that the monarchy didn't function solely on hierarchy. It functioned on people who stood guard even when the moment made no room for hesitation. But Pierce didn't dwell on pride. He dwelled on relief. Relief that the stallion remained calm. Relief that Camilla had respected the boundary. Relief that the Queen's memory had been honored the only way he knew how, through unwavering loyalty. Later, when he returned to his post, a groom approached him quietly. "You did right," the groom said, voice low. She would have wanted that. Pierce didn't answer. He just nodded once, eyes fixed ahead. Because for a royal guard, honor isn't worn like a medal. It's carried like silence, a silence filled with duty, memory, and choices made in moments measured not in seconds, but in legacy. And on that morning, in that courtyard, Alden Pierce had protected more than a horse. He had protected a bond, a history, a piece of the Queen's heart that lived on in the stallion's steady, uncertain breathing. That was the truth behind his split-second call. And that was the weight he carried long after Camilla walked away. The courtyard incident didn't explode into a scandal. There were no raised voices, no sharp reprimands, no dramatic confrontations. But inside the palace, behind doors thick enough to hold centuries of secrets, the moment echoed longer than anyone expected. Word spread quietly. A stable hand mentioned it to a groom. A groom mentioned it to a footman. A footman whispered it during tea to someone from the communications office. And by late afternoon, nearly everyone who worked within Windsor's walls had heard the same astonishing sentence. A royal guard blocked the Queen Consort from approaching Her Majesty's stallion. It wasn't spoken with malice or gossip. It was spoken with awe. Because no matter the reason, it simply wasn't something that happened every day. Camilla, meanwhile, had returned inside with a kind of calm dignity that came from years of navigating delicate territory. She didn't storm off. She didn't complain. But she was thoughtful and perhaps a little puzzled. She understood rules, and she respected the Queen's horses deeply. Still, the firmness of the intervention caught her attention. Later that afternoon, she requested a private word with the senior equerry. Not a meeting, not an official inquiry, just a quiet conversation. The equerry, a man who had served under both Elizabeth II and King Charles, greeted her with the crisp courtesy that defined his career. He knew exactly what the conversation would be about before Camilla even stepped into the room. "I hear the guard followed protocol," Camilla said gently, lowering herself into a chair. "He did, ma'am," the equerry replied, flawlessly. There was no tension between them. If anything, there was mutual respect. Camilla wasn't questioning authority. She was trying to understand the boundaries of a legacy she had inherited, not created. "What's his name?" she asked. "Captain Alden Pierce." She smiled slightly. He was very resolute. The equerry allowed himself a small chuckle. "Ma'am, he was trained by the Queen's household cavalry. Resolute is their natural state." But underneath the light humor, something more serious lingered, a truth Camilla had sensed the moment she saw the horse. Grief still lived quietly inside the royal stables. "Tell me about the stallion," she said softly. And so he did. He spoke of the horse's sensitivity, the way he paced for weeks after the Queen's passing, the way he tilted his head as if listening for footsteps that never appeared. He spoke of the careful decisions made to ensure the stallion wasn't overwhelmed by too many changes. He even mentioned how the horse had reacted the last time someone unfamiliar approached too quickly, a panic stomp that nearly injured a groom. By the time he finished, Camilla understood something deeper. The stallion wasn't being protected from her. He was being protected from loss. And in that moment, she didn't feel slighted. She felt humbled. "Then the guard was right," she said. "I'm glad he didn't hesitate." Those words changed everything. Because inside the military world, few things mean more than knowing a decision made in loyalty was respected, especially when that decision involves standing firm in front of someone far above your rank. That evening, the equerry sought out Captain Pierce. He found him in the guard's quarters, uniform half open, polishing his boots with the same disciplined energy he applied everything else. "Her Majesty asked your name," the equerry said. Pierce froze for a moment. Guards did not often hear their actions discussed at the highest levels. "Sir," and she said, "you did exactly what you were meant to do." Pierce exhaled slowly, the first sign all day that he'd been holding tension in his shoulders. "Thank you, sir. There will be no reprimand, only appreciation." The captain nodded once, but the equerry could see the emotion flicker. Pride, relief, and something quieter. Loyalty to the Queen who had shaped so much of his service. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, Camilla requested one more meeting. This time with the senior groom, the man who had known the Queen's horses better than anyone living. He entered the small sitting room awkwardly, hat in hand, boots still dusty from the stables. He bowed, unsure why he'd been summoned. "Tell me," Camilla said kindly, "what would be the right way for me to approach him? Not now, one day." The groom blinked. He hadn't expected the question. Respect was one thing, but this was understanding. So he told her. He told her how the stallion liked to be greeted from the side, never head on. How he preferred a quiet voice, not a cheerful one. How he responded to patience, not confidence. How he relaxed when someone didn't reach for him, but simply stood near him for a while. She listened to every word. "Then that's what I'll do," she said, "when the time is right." The groom bowed again, but this time with emotion in his chest. For someone who had given years of his life to caring for the Queen's horses, this moment meant more than Camilla could know. And in the days that followed, something subtle shifted, not in the public eye. The world never heard about the courtyard moment, but inside the palace, the story became a quiet lesson in respect. Respect for legacy, for loyalty, for the unseen corners of royal life where emotions lived as deeply as tradition. Camilla didn't return to the stables immediately. She waited. She let time soften the boundaries. But after several weeks, she walked back out into the courtyard, this time with the senior groom by her side. The stallion was calm that day, his coat shining, his breath steady in the cool air. Camilla didn't approach him directly. She didn't reach for his reins. She simply stood a few feet away and let him notice her. At first, he didn't react. Then he flicked an ear. Then he lifted his head slightly, studying her quietly. It wasn't a bond. It wasn't a moment of cinematic recognition. It was something smaller, but no less meaningful. Acceptance of presence. A beginning. Camilla smiled softly and stepped back. The groom nodded in approval. No words needed to be spoken. And Captain Pierce, standing guard nearby, witnessed it all with quiet pride. The boundaries he had defended so fiercely were now being approached with understanding, not pressure. That was the true resolution of the courtyard moment. Not a dramatic conversation or a sweeping apology, but a slow return to calm, built on respect for everything the stallion represented. Tradition held, duty guided, grief softened, and a new chapter began gently, not by replacing the past, but by honoring it. In the end, it wasn't about a guard blocking a queen consort. It was about a legacy so precious that even royalty paused before stepping into its shadow.